Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz alto saxophonist Michael Attias. This cat was born in Israel, raised in Paris, and now lives in the Mecca of New York City. He's on the other side of releasing 2016's Nerve Dance, and he began his love of jazz digging the lights of Miles Davis and Charlie Parker like many others in the world of jazz. That has turned into a jazz career that has included 5 critically acclaimed albums and playing with the likes of Nasheet Waits, Kris Davis, Oliver Lake, and the great Anthony Braxton, and he's learned a lot from each of them. He's got a very wise soul and plenty of insights to impart. So get to know Michael and dig this interview, my friends.
Hey, thank you for taking a few minutes out for me today. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you being interested. Thank you.
Right on. Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and start off right here and just kind of generically ask you, what has been going on with you lately?
What's been going on? Well, I've been getting ready for the release of this new album. I've been practicing a lot. I've been teaching a little bit more than I used to, doing some traveling, like that.
Right on. So talk to me about Nerve Dance. As you mentioned, you're getting ready to release it. Give me an idea of how excited you are to release this and how you feel about this project.
Well, let's see. This band, the quartet, I formed in about 2013, I believe, with a couple of old friends, John Aber and Nasheet Waits, whom I've known for quite a while. John especially, I think, since early after I came to New York in 94, 95. And then a new friend, Arwan, whom I had just met, I think the year previous, the pianist Arwan Ortiz. And I think that combination of long-term connections and then this kind of new relationship, the pianist, and new ideas instigated the group, kind of triggered this thing. And then we had one concert, and it was so much fun. I mean, there's so much fun to play with. And so since then, I was started preparing the idea of making that the next album that I would release, and we recorded it a year ago, February of 2016, one day, and it's coming out in a few weeks. And March 10th, I think, is the official release. And I'm pretty excited about it. I still like it. I still like hearing it. It feels old in a way. I mean, making a record for me is often the end of something, the end or the culmination of something I've been thinking about or working on for a while, and then you make it, and somehow when you make the album, then you release or you let go of all of that stuff. And the great thing about these players is that they've probably gone through, I'm sure, I know they've gone through a similar process. They're not the same people that they were when we recorded a year ago. So when we play again and there's some concerts coming up, it's going to be something else, and I'm looking forward to that, to a fresh start.
Some musicians don't like to listen to their music, and as you mentioned, you said it still sounds good. Do you have any problem listening to your projects after you finish them?
Well, I'm rarely satisfied with my own playing. Usually after a recording's been made, I go through a period of almost like intense rejection, not of the other people, but of myself. And then I get acclimated to it. I start to accept that that's what it is. That's what got recorded. And then oftentimes I come around. I'm never completely satisfied. I always hear something else that could have happened that might have been better. But at this point, I've grown to know that's kind of how I go through it. And then when I listen to much older recordings, when there's quite a bit of distance, then like the first record that I put out on Clean Sheet is called Credo. Between the time of its recording and its release, there was something like 7 years, 6 or 7 years. I had pretty much given up on it ever coming out. And then Pedro Costa from Clean Sheet, Pedro, just this great, wonderful visionary person who also is as crazy as any musician in a way. I told him, this is no longer the music I do. This band's probably never going to play again. Are you sure you want to put this out? And he goes, yeah, the music's great. That's all that matters. Anyway, when it came out, it felt like the music of how to put it, like a younger cousin, not me, like somebody related to me, but somebody from a long time ago. And that was interesting. There was kind of an interesting feeling of like different times of your life speaking to each other, and I had more acceptance of it at that point. But I remember when I initially recorded it, it was like, God, I sound awful. I still go through that.
I understand. Let me ask you this. Let's go from the hyper-present right now in your life to the beginnings of your life. You were born in Israel, raised in Paris. Talk to me about your childhood and your family and how you got so interested in jazz.
Yeah, so I was born in Haifa. My mother had already moved to Paris. My parents had moved to Paris from Morocco a few years before my birth. And then she went to Israel to have me because her family was there, her mother, her sisters. She wanted to be close to them. So I grew up in Paris till I was about 8 years old, 8 and a half, and then we moved to Minneapolis. And that was pretty, how do I put it, like harsh or brutal break, like very intense, like culture shock arriving in Minnesota in January. I think the wind chill factor was something like 65 degrees below zero. Not speaking a word of English, being dropped in the American public school like a week after we arrived. And for several years I continued doing my French studies through a correspondence school, so that if we ever went back to France, I would be able to just jump in right away the same way I'd left off. I was always into music. When I was in Paris still, like from the age of 6, 7, somewhere like that, I played violin for about a year. The jazz, I think, when I was about 12, and this is in Minneapolis, a friend of mine used to hang out at his place. His father had a great record collection, a lot of albums from the 70s, with these amazing covers. And the one that had absolutely the most amazing cover to me was Bitches Brew. So I took that home and just started listening to it over and over because I couldn't understand it, but just the mood of it was so powerful, the sound of it. And then about like 13 and a half, 14 years old, I went to the Minneapolis Public Library, which was an amazing resource. I mean, nobody I knew was into jazz around me, so I had to kind of educate myself. I went to the Minneapolis Public Library, and they had these volumes, Genius of Modern Music. Is that what it was called? These Charlie Parker on Verve records. And there was one that had the session with Dizzy Gillespie and Thelonious Monk, where they play Oscar for Treadwell, and that was amazing. That was just a shock. I think that's the first time I heard Monk, that intro on Oscar for Treadwell and Bird and all that. So that's, listening began around there. It was informed by a lot of reading too. I would come across a name, then go to the library and check out the record. And I guess the next big shock was probably, Ornette, seeing The Shape of Jazz to Come. Same thing, just the cover kind of impressed me. I think I'd seen the name somewhere, and I was curious, and I guess it must have been about 14 or 15. And that's when I started playing saxophone.
When you picked up the horn and you started playing, did you know that was going to be your life, that your destiny was going to be being a musician?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds kind of unbelievable, but it's actually the truth is that I started playing saxophone because I had a dream. I'd fallen asleep one night. I went to bed, like every night I went to sleep practically listening to on a small tape recorder that I had under my pillow, listening to music, to stuff that I had recorded, taped off of the albums that I was checking out at the library. So a lot of different stuff, a lot of Lester Young, Billie Holiday, and a lot of Miles Davis. And right before going to sleep, right before dropping off completely into unconsciousness, there would be this moment, which I really treasured, which was when the horns began to speak, kind of in my almost asleep self, to my dreaming self, where I would start to hear language, very clearly coming out through Miles Davis's horn. It was very intense, and often I would try to wake myself up and transcribe what they were saying, but as soon as I woke up, or as soon as I shook myself out of that state, that the words would vanish. So it was kind of an impression of language without being actual words. And one of these nights, falling asleep and having that experience, I had a dream that I was on a bus with some musicians, and one of them hands me this small box, this tiny box, this case, and says, "Here, open it." And I open it, and there's a small saxophone inside. And he says, play. And I go, I don't know how to play. He goes, no, go ahead. And I took it out of the box, and suddenly it's a full-size alto saxophone, and I start playing. And probably what happened is that the music that was playing on the tape recorder while I was sleeping filtered into the dream, and I started playing whoever, maybe Cannonball or Coltrane solo on the saxophone. And it was such an amazing feeling. I woke up like the next morning feeling like, I don't know, like transformed. Really, like it was like a conversion experience or something.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And as soon as in that day, I was like, okay, I have to get a horn. I have to start doing this. It was
interesting. That's very cool.
Yeah, it was pretty far away from my circumstances. I mean, there was no other reason to do it other than that I had fallen in love with that music and that I'd had that dream. And suddenly I projected myself into that world, you know.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's great, man. You know, speaking of getting projected into different worlds, you obviously said that when you moved to the States in Minneapolis, it was a big culture shock for you, but it had to be kind of the same thing when you went to New York in '94 and kind of jumped into that jazz hotbed. What was that move like, and how did you kind of get interwoven into the New York scene?
Going back a ways. Well, I had been going for the previous 10 years or something since I was 17. I had been pretty nomadic. I'd spent a period of going back to Paris for 3 years, of traveling through the U.S., doing like long, almost year-long road trips, and going back and forth across the Atlantic, homeless, pretty much homeless. I dropped out of college after a year, a lot of like kind of just life experiences. And so coming to New York in a strange way was the idea that all of this moving around had become a form of stagnation, and that now in order to really move forward, I had to stop moving. I had to just stay in one place. And the reason I came back to the U.S. was because of an encounter I'd had with Anthony Braxton on a visit from Paris, where I was living, to go see my parents, who at that time were in Connecticut. And a friend of mine told me that Anthony Braxton was leading an ensemble and teaching at Wesleyan, and that I should come down and just sit in with the band, which I did. And I guess that was the summer before moving to New York. No, 2 summers, right. Yeah, I met him. He was incredible, incredibly encouraging and welcoming, and told me, "What are you doing living in France? We need musicians like you back in America." I mean, he's extravagantly complimentary to any young musician, I think, who shows love and passion for the music and interest in his work and so on. And so with that, I went to Middletown. I moved to Middletown for the following spring semester. And I just showed up. I didn't enroll in the school. I showed up at Braxton's class. I said, "Remember me?" He didn't really quite remember me, which freaked me out. For a moment, I thought, wow, I'd really picked up and given up everything and just moved there on the basis of a conversation. And then, he was great. I got to spend a lot of time with him and play with him, and was making trips into New York City from there, before moving there, and hearing stuff and hanging out. And so there was a buffer zone between those 10 years of moving around and being in Paris and then coming to New York. There was this period, which is the period in Middletown. I spent a few months there at Wesleyan. And then when I moved to New York, it was a shock. I mean, it's very different. Functioning as a musician there was very different from what I'd experienced in Paris. The whole sociology of it, the way that people make music, the way people rehearse or don't rehearse. There was something I felt kind of coddled in Paris, in the way that I had friends, musician friends, and if I wrote something, I could just call them up and we'd get together and work on it, which is possible here, but somehow, I don't know. It was different. It changed everything for me. It changed the way I wrote, the way it also made me aware that there were a lot of things that I hadn't gotten together. Just fundamental musical things. I'm pretty much self-taught, which means that in some areas I was advanced, and in some areas I was really there were some rudimentary things that I had skipped over. And coming to New York and realizing that is pretty daunting. Yeah, but it was great. I mean, I feel like since I've moved here, I've been through several different lives, deaths and rebirths and all of that.
Reincarnation.
Yeah, I mean, it happens, so when you ask me about it, it's really like I'm talking about somebody else.
Yeah, that's interesting. It almost sounds like what you were describing with albums, the sound that you had at one point and what your sound is now. So what I want to ask you to kind of piggyback off of that is, it takes a long time. Miles Davis has had quotes about how long it takes to find your voice in your music and what your voice is. And a lot of these guys, like Bird and him and Ornette Coleman, they all have their own very distinct voice. When you throw on their music and put a blindfold on, it's them, without looking at the cover or knowing who it is. So let me ask you this. you're a very seasoned musician that's been working on your sound for a long time. What do you think your sound is? What is your voice in the world of jazz?
Oh, oh my God! I mean, I think I'm the worst person to ask about that. All I can say is that I often think about the idea of shedding. We talk about shedding as acquiring often, acquiring technique or new idea. But shedding is also letting go of things, letting go of previous skins, letting go of ways of playing. You think about Train, like just the incredible rate of transformation in his playing from the beginning of playing with Miles to having his own band to Interstellar Space. That he always let go of where he was. There wasn't this idea of trying to retain. And that's exactly right to say it like that. But I think, you know what I mean? He didn't go back. It wasn't like he just accumulated a bunch of different voices and then like in 1962 said, okay, now I'm going to play like it's 1956. He never did that. He forged ahead. And I have a great respect for that. It's very counter to the prevailing model right now, which is that all languages and all styles should be available to all musicians at any time. And this, which is great too. There's this great eclecticism and so on, and that you should be able to go from playing this way to playing that way. I don't think I'm quite like that. I'm interested in a lot of different music. I love a lot of different things, and even like on this new record, it was really important to me that each piece was somehow different and expressed a different way of relating to notation, relating to group interaction, that there were different ideas of music in each piece, as a way of exercising the band muscle and as a way of developing a language for us and keeping it fresh for everybody. So even though there's that, there's still I really respect that idea that you try to that you're not playing to recreate anything and that you're playing to discover. And that in that discovery there are things that you can't do, and there are limitations and restrictions, and those are just as important as the things that you can do. If all you're playing is the reiteration of like technical mastery or saying I can, I think the music gets very limited in its scope and emotional validity. And the great players, I think, all had this area of how to put it. Like something that at first seems awkward and then becomes incredibly graceful. I think the courage of like the great players in proposing a new idea of beauty, which necessarily must have sounded ugly to the people around them at the time. You see reviews of early Train, it's like what an ugly sound, or Monk or Arnett or Cecil or whoever, or Bird for that matter. I think it was Braxton who said something like, find out what is most uncomfortable in your playing, makes you uncomfortable, make other people uncomfortable, and make a system out of it. I'm probably misquoting, but I appreciate that. In a way, like, don't round out what makes you singular. Don't normalize it. Explore it, because in that there's the seed of who you are, of what your voice is going to be.
That's a beautiful answer. I love it. And the one thing that sticks out to me with what you're saying about like Bird not going back to 62 and kind of having a fresh mindset, it almost sounds like a dose of jazz existentialism. You're hopping up, you're waiting for Godot, and you're going to go into something new,
Cool. Well, I love that good. So
there you go.
Yeah, if you're honest, there's just, I think that's what it is. I think for all players, at some point you're in the unknown. That's the great thing, and you're in the unknown every time you play with a group, and you try to reach it through all the layers of habit and conditioned reflexes to really get to that thing where the music starts to reveal itself.
It's interesting. Look at someone like Miles Davis, how many times he had to redefine his sound. He didn't even like the word jazz, but what he wanted to do was push the whole entire music idiom further. Some of these guys may do it once or twice in their career, but he was always coming up with some new level of sound, from the Birth of Cool. From Kinda Blue to Birth of Cool to Bitches Brew to Sketches of Spain, even towards the end of his life. That guy was a reincarnate. He was like a cat. He had like 9 lives times 2.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's courage. That's a lot of courage. let me kind of ask you this, is obviously everything's worked out since you've come to the States and New York, and you've really grown over your career. 5+ critically acclaimed albums. You played with all kinds of people like Kris Davis, Oliver Lake, Anthony Braxton, as you mentioned. How do you feel about your career when you look back on what you've done and where you are today sitting in this conversation? How do you feel about your career in music?
I have to say I don't really think of it as I guess career is the word. I don't see it as separate from my life, so it's hard to, when you ask me that, that's like how I think about everything. But in terms of, I've been really lucky, I've gotten to play like with people that you've mentioned. I've gotten to, to play with people that I dreamed that I never imagined that I would get to work with, like Paul Motion, and record with him, and all of those experiences are alive in me. The music is alive, the music that transpired is alive in me somewhere. But I feel like I'm really at the beginning, or really like in a sense, like I've started over so many times that it always feels like just like a new start. There are things, so many things that I've long wanted to do that I haven't done yet, and that I hope I have enough time to do them, and the ability to do them, and so the career aspect of it is really just the vehicle for making things happen that are musically and, as you said, existentially necessary to me.
Let me ask you this. We've mentioned a lot of big names. You've mentioned a lot of those players that you would go in the library and listen to, and just all of the names that have been put out there. Let me ask you this. If you could jump into a jazz time machine right now and go back in time and witness a musician that you never saw live, who would you want to see play on a live stage?
If there's one person out of all that, I would say probably Charlie Parker.
Yeah.
So many. So many at so many different moments. I wish I would love to be at, specifically at that concert that's on Bird live at St. Nick's. I wish I'd been there to hear him play. I didn't know what time it was. But the great thing about music, one of the great things about music is that we have these documents, and if you can really focus and really, again, project yourself into the sound, listening, then you are there. The imagination takes you there. It is the time machine. The time machine is there. It's we have the time machines. It's a magical thing, and it's really important to remember. Like when there's like a little bit of teaching that I've done, I really emphasize the importance of going to these texts and listening, and then trying to remember them in your head, like playing them back in your head, like letting your imagination, especially for musicians, to really develop that faculty of the imagination and of internal hearing. It's very important in our age. Right now we have so much information available to us. And we have these devices that become these kind of prosthesis of the imagination and of memory. And the danger with that is that it actually amputates the ability to do it on your own. So it's important to keep that faculty going of intense focus and listening, even if it's just for 10 minutes, but to really not be doing anything else. And then being able to conjure one of these recordings in your head and play it back as if your mind had become like the radio or we have the time machines.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Every time I get an answer for this, I'm like, my God, that's one of the best answers I've ever heard. I always get one up, and that was a beautiful answer. I love it. Your imagination is your time machine. That's great. So speaking of your imagination, what is the last vinyl LP you dropped the needle down on?
What is the last thing that I've been listening to? I've been listening to, actually literally needled, because I do love to listen to vinyl, is this Cannonball Adderley Sharpshooters. It's a recording from 1958 with Sam Jones and Jimmy Cobb and Junior Mance and his brother Nat. And in particular, there's a rendition of What's New on there that's pretty unbelievable.
Nice. Very nice. Let me ask you this generically. Why do you love jazz?
So, assuming that we mean the same thing, which is a pretty big assumption when we say the word jazz.
Sure.
I think it's not more, but yeah, I guess more essentially than the style, or the way that, like the stylistic attributes of it. It's the actual process of that music. It's the relationship between the players. It's this thing that you can. I mean, I love so much music, but I guess what would be specific to, you could call jazz, is just that there's a relationship between, what's written down, if it's written down, which could very well not be, and how people play and how people relate to each other and the singularity of their sounds. So that there isn't this kind of model of the absolute sound of an alto saxophone or a trumpet or a bass. It's really these different incarnations, these different people, like you said earlier, these voices that are instantly recognizable, whether it's Miles or Sam Jones or Charlie Hayden or Ornette or Billy Higgins. It's that thing that like as if each musician had two selves, had one self, which is the kind of the person that walks around and goes to the grocery store and drinks coffee and does whatever and talks to people and hangs out and carries the instruments around. And then the other self, which is made up entirely out of sound and patterns of sound and silence and time and breath. And that's like almost, that person also has a history and a life. And it's very strange when you meet musicians because they're really two people. They're the people that you see, but then there's this other person that's there, this musical entity, this identity. And who's entirely responsible for what they play, for their discourse. I mean, I guess you can say about other things that pushed really to the extreme in jazz, because they're improvising, because they're making up that language themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes total sense.
I mean, I love that, and I love that people, and also it's a music of rebellion. It's really, to me, it's like, it's got to keep that spirit of questioning and of attacking limits and attacking like whatever society wants to impose on you as an assigned identity or an assigned self.
Yeah.
I think, musicians kind of like, they elect their family, they choose their lineage. They're born, they have roots, they have different, I mean, in my case, it's like, it's all invented. It's all a counter lineage. It's all a counter life that I've made for myself, out of the people that I've loved, the experiences that I've had, the music I've listened to, and it's all part of me. And I think every musician kind of goes through that, creating their own genealogy in the music. And, it's a rebellious music. It's got to keep that spirit. When that spirit goes away, the music goes dead, I think, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. Everyone has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, those that you play for live, those that will listen to your albums. But when you wake up and you go out into the world, who do you think you are?
Oh, God. I mean, I really don't know. I don't want to know. I mean, I want to do, I am whatever I am full of doing at that moment, full of doing, dreaming, thinking. The tricky thing with identity is that it assumes that you remain identical to yourself. I mean, it's in the word itself. That part of identity is not interesting to me. I mean, we have masks. There are the social masks. There are the different personae that we carry around in order to get things done and do what we do. I mean, who I am, there's some part of who I am which I really don't know. I don't remember it. It was there before I have memory. It's there as soon as you start to breathe and your heart beats, and the self, whatever you know of yourself, is just a fragment of all of that. So I'm not really interested in looking at the mirror to find out who I am. It's more like what can I manage to do to really be full and present in today at this very moment. That's who I am, I can say.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I think that's a fitting way to kind of wrap everything up. Thank you for taking some time out for me today. It was an extremely illuminating interview, and I appreciate your time offering yourself to my audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your questions.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Israel, New York, Boston, KC, and spots all over the planet. And thanks to Michael for his time, his stories, and that wisdom. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.